Tutankhamun, ancient Egyptian, Egyptological pronunciation Tutankhamun, circa 1341 to 1323 BC, sometimes referred to as King Tut, was an Egyptian pharaoh who was the last of his royal family to rule during the end of the 18th dynasty during the New Kingdom of Egyptian history. His father is believed to be the pharaoh Akhenaten, identified as the mummy found in the tomb KV 55. His mother is his father's sister, identified through DNA testing as an unknown mummy referred to as the younger lady who was found in KV 35. Tutankhamun took the throne at 8 or 9 years of age under the unprecedented viziership of his eventual successor, to whom he may have been related. He married his paternal half-sister Ankhesenamun. During their marriage they lost 2 daughters, one at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy and the other shortly after birth at full term. His names Tutankhaten and Tutankhamun are thought to mean living image of Aten and living image of Amun, with Aten replaced by Amun after Akhenaten's death. Tutankhamun restored the ancient Egyptian religion after its dissolution by his father, enriched and endowed the priestly orders of 2 important cults, and began restoring old monuments damaged during the previous Amarna period. He reburied his father's remains in the Valley of the Kings, and relocated the capital from Akhetaten back to Thebes. Tutankhamun was physically disabled with the deformity of his left foot along with bone necrosis that required the use of a cane, several of which were found in his tomb. He had other health issues including scoliosis and had contracted several strains of malaria. The deaths of some involved in discovery of Tutankhamun's mummy have been popularly attributed to the curse of the pharaohs. Some of his treasure has traveled worldwide with unprecedented response. Family. Tutankhamun, whose original name was Tutankhaten or Tutankhaten, was born during the reign of Akhenaten, during the late 18th dynasty of Egypt. Akhenaten's reign was characterized by a dramatic shift in ancient Egyptian religion, known as Atenism, and the relocation of the capital to the site of Amarna, which gave its name to the modern term for this era, the Amarna period. Toward the end of the Amarna period, 2 other pharaohs appear in the record who were apparently Akhenaten's co-regents. Neferneferuaten, a female ruler who may have been Akhenaten's wife Nefertiti or his daughter Meritaten, and Smenkhare, whom some Egyptologists believe was the same person as Neferneferuaten but most regard as a distinct figure. An inscription from Hermopolis refers to Tutankhaten as a king's son, and he is generally thought to have been the son of Akhenaten. Although some suggestions instead of that, Smenkhare was his father, inscriptions from Tutankhamun's reign treat him as a son of Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III. But that is only possible if Akhenaten's 17-year reign included a long co-regency with his father, a possibility that many Egyptologists once supported but is now being abandoned. While some suggestions have been made that Tutankhamun's mother was Mekhetaten, the second daughter of Akhenaten, and Nefertiti, based on a relief from the royal tomb at Amarna, this possibility has been deemed unlikely given that she was about 10 years old at the time of her death. Another interpretation of the relief names Nefertiti as his mother. When Tutankhaten became king, he married Ankhesenamun, one of Akhenaten's daughters, who later changed her name to Ankhesenamun. They had 2 daughters, neither of whom survived infancy. While only an incomplete genetic profile was obtained from the 2 mummified fetuses, it was enough to confirm that Tutankhamun was their father. Likewise, only partial data for the 2 female mummies from KV-21 has been obtained so far. KV-21A has been suggested as the mother of the fetuses, but the data is not statistically significant enough to allow her to be securely identified as Ankhesenamun. Computed tomography studies published in 2011 revealed that one daughter was born prematurely at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy and the other at full term, 9 months. Tutankhamun's death marked the end of the royal line of the 18th dynasty. Reign. Tutankhamun was between 8 and 9 years of age when he ascended the throne and became pharaoh, taking the throne name Nebkep-Heror. He reigned for about 9 years. During Tutankhamun's reign, the position of vizier had been split between Upper and Lower Egypt. The principal vizier for Upper Egypt was Usermontu. Another figure named Penchu was also vizier, but it is unclear of which lands. It is not entirely known if Tutankhamun's successor, actually held this position. The Amarna rulers are central in the list, but which name corresponds with which historic figure is not agreed upon by researchers. Aru and Asenchairs have been identified with Horemheb and Akhenaten and Rathatus with Tutankhamun. The names are also associated with Smenkhare, Amenhotep III. Kings were venerated after their deaths through mortuary cults and associated temples. Tutankhamun was one of the few kings worshipped in this manner during his lifetime. A stela discovered at Karnak and dedicated to Amun-Ra and Tutankhamun indicates that the king could be appealed to in his deified state for forgiveness and to free the petitioner from an ailment caused by sin. Temples of his cult were built as far away as in Kawa and Pharoah in Nubia. The title of the sister of the viceroy of Kush included a reference to the deified king, indicative of the universality of his cult. In order for the pharaoh, who held divine office, to be linked to the people and the gods, special epithets were created for them at their accession to the throne. The ancient Egyptian titulary also served to demonstrate one's qualities and link them to the terrestrial realm. The 5 names were developed over the centuries beginning with the Horus name. Tutankhamun's original nomen, Tutankhaten, did not have a Nebdi name or a gold falcon name associated with it, as nothing has been found with the full 5-name protocol. Campaigns and monuments. The country was economically weak and in turmoil following the reign of Akhenaten. Diplomatic relations with other kingdoms had been neglected, and Tutankhamun sought to restore them, with a Mitanni. Evidence of his success is suggested by the gifts from various countries found in his tomb. Despite his efforts for improved relations, battles with Nubians and Asiatics were recorded in his mortuary temple at Thebes. His tomb contained body armor, folding stools appropriate for military campaigns, and bows, and he was trained in archery. However, given his youth and physical disabilities, which seemed to require the use of a cane in order to walk, most historians speculate that he did not personally take part in these battles. Given his age, the king probably had advisors, which presumably included, who succeeded Tutankhamun, and General Horemheb, possible son-in-law and successor. Horemheb records that the king appointed him lord of the land as hereditary prince to maintain law. He also noted his ability to calm the young king when his temper flared. In his 3rd regnal year, Tutankhamun reversed several changes made during his father's reign. He ended the worship of the god Aten and restored the god Amun to supremacy. The ban on the cult of Amun was lifted and traditional privileges were restored to its priesthood. The capital was moved back to Thebes and the city of Akhetaten was abandoned. As part of his restoration, the king initiated building projects, in particular at Karnak in Thebes, where he laid out the Sphinx Avenue leading to the Temple of Mut. The sphinxes were originally made for Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They were given new ram heads and small statues of the king. At Luxor Temple he completed the decoration of the entrance colonnade of Amenhotep III. Monuments defaced under Akhenaten were restored, and new cult images of the god Amun were created. The traditional festivals were now celebrated again, including those related to the Apis bull, Hormeket, and Opet. His restoration stela erected in front of Karnak Temple says, "The temples of the gods and goddesses were in ruins. Their shrines were deserted and overgrown. Their sanctuaries were as non-existent, and their courts were used as roads. The gods turned their backs upon this land. If anyone made a prayer to a god for advice, he would never respond." A building called the Temple of Nebkheper, or Beloved of Amun, who puts Thebes in order, which may be identical to a building called Temple of Nebkheper in Thebes, a possible mortuary temple, used recycled taladat from Akhenaten's East Karnak-Aten temples, indicating that the dismantling of these temples was already underway. Many of Tutankhamun's construction projects were uncompleted at the time of his death and were completed by or usurped by his successors, especially Horemheb. The Sphinx Avenue was completed by his successor and the whole was usurped by Horemheb. The restoration stele was usurped by Horemheb. Pieces of the Temple of Nebkheper in Thebes were recycled into Horemheb's own building projects. Health and death. Tutankhamun was slight of build, and roughly 167 centimeters, 5 feet 6 inch, tall. He had large front incisors and an overbite characteristic of the Thutmose royal line to which he belonged. Analysis of the clothing found in his tomb, particularly the dimensions of his loincloths and belts, indicates that he had a narrow waist and rounded hips. In attempts to explain both his unusual depiction in art and his early death, it has been theorized that Tutankhamun had gynecomastia, Marfan syndrome, Wilson-Turner X-linked intellectual disability syndrome, Froelich syndrome, adiposogenital dystrophy, Klinefelter syndrome, androgen insensitivity syndrome, aromatase success syndrome in conjunction with sagittal craniosynostosis syndrome, Antley-Bixler syndrome or one of its variants. It has also been suggested that he had inherited temporal lobe epilepsy in a bid to explain the religiosity of his great-grandfather Thutmose IV and father Akhenaten and their early deaths. However, caution has been urged in this diagnosis. In 1980, conducted X-ray examinations of New Kingdom pharaohs' crania and skeletal remains, which included the mummified remains of Tutankhamun. The authors determined that the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty bore strong similarities to contemporary Nubians with slight differences. In January 2005, Tutankhamun's mummy was CT scanned. The results showed that the young king had a partially cleft hard palate and possibly a mild case of scoliosis. Additionally, he was diagnosed with a flat right foot with hypophalangism, while his left foot was clubbed and had bone necrosis of the second and third metatarsals, Freiberg disease or Keuller disease too. However, the clubfoot diagnosis is disputed. It is suggested that the position is a result of Tutankhamun habitually walking on the outside of his foot due to the pain caused by Keuller disease too. This theory has been refuted. The condition may have forced Tutankhamun to walk with the use of a cane, many of which were found in his tomb. Genetic testing through STR analysis rejected the hypothesis of gynecomastia and craniosynostosis, or Marfan syndrome. Genetic testing for Stever, AMA1, or MSP1 genes specific for Plasmodium falciparum revealed indications of malaria tropica in 4 mummies, including Tutankhamun's. This is currently the oldest known genetic proof of the ailment. The team discovered DNA from several strains of the parasite, indicating that he was repeatedly infected with the most severe strain of malaria. His malaria infections may have caused a fatal immune response in the body or triggered circulatory shock. The CT scan also showed that he had experienced a compound left leg fracture. This injury, being the result of modern damage, was ruled out based on the ragged edges of the fracture. Modern damage features sharp edges. Embalming substances were present within the fracture, indicating that it was associated with an open wound. No signs of healing were present. A facial reconstruction of Tutankhamun was carried out in 2005 by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities. 3 separate teams, Egyptian, French, and American, worked separately to approximate the face of the boy king. While the Egyptian and French teams knew their subject was Tutankhamun, all teams produced very similar results, but it was that of the French team that was ultimately cast in silicone. An Egyptologist, in 2008, expressed criticism of the forensic reconstruction in a journal review. He noted that Tutankhamun's face was depicted as very light-skinned, which reflected a bias among media outlets. Tomb. Tutankhamun was buried in a tomb that was unusually small considering his status. His death may have occurred unexpectedly, before the completion of a grander royal tomb, causing his mummy to be buried in a tomb intended for someone else. This would preserve the observance of the customary 70 days between death and burial. His tomb was robbed at least twice in antiquity, but based on the items taken, including perishable oils and perfumes, and the evidence of restoration of the tomb after the intrusions, these robberies likely took place within several months at most of the initial burial. The location of the tomb was lost because it had come to be buried by debris from subsequent tombs, and workers' houses were built over the tomb entrance. The concession rights for excavating the Valley of the Kings was held from 1905 until 1914. In that time, he had unearthed 10 tombs, including the nearly intact but non-royal tomb of Queen Tia's parents, Yuya and Thuya. As he continued working there in the later years, he uncovered nothing of major significance. The team did find several objects in KV-58 referring to Tutankhamun, which included knobs and handles bearing his name, most significantly the embalming cache of the king, KV-54. He believed this to be the pharaoh's lost tomb and published his findings as such with the line, "I fear the Valley of the Tombs is exhausted." In 1907, the team was invited to excavate in the valley. The team had hoped this would lead to their gaining the concession when others gave it up, but had to be satisfied with excavations in different parts of the Theban necropolis for 7 more years. After a systematic search beginning in 1915, The team discovered the actual tomb of Tutankhamun, KV62, in November 1922. An ancient stroke of luck allowed the tomb to survive to modern times. The tomb's entrance was buried by mounds of debris from the cutting of KV9 over 150 years. After Tutankhamun's burial, ancient workmen's huts were also built on the site. This area remained unexcavated until 1922 due to its proximity to KV9, as excavations would impede tourist access to that tomb. The team commenced excavations in early November 1922, before the height of the tourist season. The first step of the tomb's entrance staircase was uncovered on November 4, 1922. According to the team's account, the workmen discovered the step while digging beneath the remains of the huts. Other accounts attribute the discovery to a boy digging outside the assigned work area. By February 1923, the antechamber had been cleared of everything but 2 sentinel statues. A day and time were selected to unseal the tomb with about 20 appointed witnesses, several Egyptian officials, museum representatives and the staff of the Government Press Bureau. On February 17, 1923 at just after 2 o'clock, the seal was broken.